Morning again, everybody. Turning now to the anarchist cookbook, what you'll hear in this case from one of Mr. Gargiulo's ex-girlfriends, her name's Suzanne Canzanieri, is that Mr. Gargiulo liked this book, and he talked about this book. And he talked about what was in it. So this is a book that was printed, I believe, back in the 70s, and a chapter in this book talks a lot about knives. You know, we're talking about 4 stabbing cases here, and in this particular book that Mr. Gargiulo had a penchant for, there's a section on knives, how to maneuver the knife, how to hold the knife, etc., and then how to use the knife in terms of on what parts of the human body to stab somebody to be the most effective, including the throat, the collar thrust, which is that subclavian area, and you saw photographs earlier of the victims with those types of injuries. And then part of this chapter on knives is the primary key to this type of attack is speed and silence. Any of the above attacks, which are based on approaching the enemy from the rear, can be employed to silence or a sentry or guard by simply covering his nose and mouth with your free hand while thrusting the knife into one of the fatal spots with the other. We believe the evidence will show, as it comes out in the case, that this is what Mr. Gargiulo was doing. As part of the Boccaccio case, you'll hear from witnesses Greg D. Demonic, Karen Abenanti, and Rodney Anderson. They are criminalists and DNA experts from Chicago. They are expected to testify that there was no biologic evidence of sexual assault on Tricia, and that Mr. Gargiulo's DNA matches the DNA on Tricia's fingernails. This is Anthony DiLorenzo. This is one of Mr. Gargiulo's friends from back in the 90s. Mr. DiLorenzo worked with Mr. Gargiulo as a bouncer at the Rainbow Room Bar, which is in Hollywood. I think it's down off Sunset right here. And that was back in the 90s. And you can see a photograph there of Mr. Gargiulo and Mr. DiLorenzo at a party. Mr. DiLorenzo, when he testifies, he will tell you that he has a prior criminal record. He has a history for theft and drug-related type offenses. But he was a friend of Mr. Gargiulo's, and he was the one who said that Mr. Gargiulo back in the 90s said, and this is from a prior hearing is what you're looking at, that transcript there. What Mr. DiLorenzo we expect to testify to is that Mr. Gargiulo said, I actually left the bitch on the step for dead, referring to Ms. Boccaccio. You'll also hear from witness Teamer Leary. Mr. Leary is another friend of Mr. Gargiulo's. He also worked with Mr. Gargiulo as a bouncer at the Rainbow Room in Hollywood back in the 90s. Mr. Leary also has a very significant prior criminal history, including some violent offenses. What we expect he'll testify to, which he talked about before in another hearing, was that Mr. Gargiulo told him that he stabbed up the girl, in referring to Ms. Boccaccio. Mr. Leary and Mr. DiLorenzo will also testify that they saw Mr. Gargiulo on television, accused of the Boccaccio murder. And when they saw that, they were, according to their girlfriends at the time, were in shock and awe over that. And you'll hear from the girlfriends, Melissa Barrios and Camille McGowan. They'll testify for you. They had one of those, oh wow, moments when they were watching it on TV and Mr. Gargiulo was on TV. And then after Mr. Leary and Mr. DiLorenzo found out that what they knew about Mr. Gargiulo was relevant, and they decided to come forward to law enforcement and report what they knew, they started texting each other about being heroes for coming forward with information about Gargiulo, and they'll tell you about that. They both testified at a prior hearing about Mr. Gargiulo's statements. Turning now to the Ashley Ellerin case. This is Ms. Ellerin, who was 22 years old when Mr. Gargiulo stabbed her to death. This is her residence on Pinehurst Road in Hollywood. That's Ms. Ellerin's burgundy and maroon colored BMW in the driveway. That's the house behind it that's in yellow. And you'll see that the house is very secure. There's bars all around the perimeter of the house and all around the windows. The house was very, very secure. This is an aerial view. And again, we will be talking a lot throughout the case about the proximity between the victims and Mr. Gargiulo. This is this particular proximity. When Ms. Ellerin was stabbed to death in 2001, Mr. Gargiulo lived at 1759 North Orchid Avenue in Hollywood, and it's that building there. And then Ashley lived right down the street at 1911 Pinehurst Road. And that was roughly about 400 feet away. What you'll also hear is that right across the street from Ashley Ellerin's apartment is a dog park. And Mr. Gargiulo used to frequent that dog park. And we will be offering to you an evidence as the case progresses that this is one of the areas where Mr. Gargiulo would use as a vantage point so that he could watch Ms. Ellerin. Judge Fiedler, by the way, mentioned earlier that there will be a jury view in this case. And what that means is that you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, will have the opportunity to go out with the court staff and see these particular scenes so you can see the geography yourself and the proximity yourself. We'll talk a lot more about that later. That will probably happen in June, but you will be able to see this yourselves. This is Mr. Gargiulo's apartment building at 1759 Orchid Avenue. He lived on the first floor towards the back. This is the view from the top of Mr. Gargiulo's building. And Ms. Ellerin's house is right off in the distance there in that red circle. So if you go to the top of this building, which is open to all the tenants, there's a stairway that goes up, and you look across, you can see Ms. Ellerin's residence, and her bedroom happens to be on that side of the house, so you can see if her light is on, her light is off, etc. So this is a vantage point from Mr. Gargiulo's apartment building to Ms. Ellerin's residence. This is the dog park right across the street from Ms. Ellerin's residence, which is right there. I'll go back one. That's Ms. Ellerin's residence right there across the dog park. And you'll get to see that in person. This is what Ms. Ellerin's home looks like from the dog park at night. And you can see that if you are in the dog park, it's very, very dark. But when the house is lit up inside, you can see what's going on inside. You can watch people's movements inside. And we're offering that again to show that Mr. Gargiulo is watching all the time and waiting for an opportunity to kill. And this is one of his vantage points that you'll see. This is the front door of Ms. Ellerin's home on the day of the murder. This is the floor plan of the house. When we do the jury view, you will not go into the house. You'll be out in front of the house, we expect. But this is what the inside of the house looks like. And it's an older style bungalow home in Hollywood. And the floor plan is a little bit older. So we wanted to show this to you so you have a little bit of a visual idea of what's going on here. So here's Pinehurst Road at the bottom. The front door is right here where I'm illuminating it now. There's a sunroom that's adjacent to the front door. And later on, we'll talk about Ashton Kutcher when he came over to the house and looked into the house. That's one of the windows he looked through was the sunroom right here to look into the house. Ashley's body is toward the top. You can see the stick figure up there. That's Ashley's body just outside of the bathroom. Her bedroom is in the upper left-hand corner. That's her bathroom where we believe she had just exited the shower and was getting ready to go out with Mr. Kutcher when she was attacked from behind. And then there was a struggle right here in the area right outside the bathroom where she was stabbed 47 times. That's her bedroom to the right. The kitchen is over here on the right-hand side. The living room is in the lower right-hand corner, and this area in front is a sunroom, and you can see that these windows towards the front, those are the windows that you can see into from the dog park. These spots you're seeing here, those are indicators of the blood trail that was left leaving the house. That's the basic layout of Ms. Ellerin's residence. And you can see there's a red circle now around where her body was found. The basic chronology of Ms. Ellerin's killing is as follows. On February 21st, 2001, Ashley dropped her father off at the airport. So the sequence of events starts at about 5 o'clock p.m. Between 7 and 8:15 p.m., Ashley's friend Mark Durbin came over and they had sex. He later left and locked the door. That occurred between 7 and 8:15 p.m. Mr. Durbin will be testifying probably in late May. At 8:24 p.m., Ashley talked to Mr. Kutcher on the phone, and they confirmed a plan to go out that night. Between 8:15 and 8:30 p.m., while walking his dog in the park, Mr. Todd Jackson heard screaming coming from Ashley's house. That evidence is offered to you to show a possible approximate time of the attack. What Mr. Jackson will explain is that he heard the screaming, and when he was walking his dog in the dog park, the dog alerted on the house twice. At between 9 and 9:20 p.m., Mr. Durbin called Ashley approximately 2 to 3 times, but Ms. Ellerin did not answer. We believe the evidence will show that by that point she had been murdered. At 10 p.m., Ashley's friend Justin Peterson called Ashley, but there was no answer. At 10:15 p.m., Mr. Kutcher called Ashley with no answer. And then around 10:15 p.m., Ashley's roommate, Jennifer DeSisto, came home, but the door was locked. She was locked out because she didn't have her keys. The lights were on inside. She knocked, but there was no response. She left and spent the night at a friend's house. At 10:45 p.m., Mr. Kutcher arrived at Ashley's house and knocked on the door. After no response, he called and received no answer. Mr. Kutcher looked in the window and saw what he thought was spilled wine on the floor. We believe now the evidence will show that was actually blood, and Ashley had already been murdered. The following morning at 9:15 a.m., Jennifer DeSisto returned home, went in the house, and discovered Ashley's body and called the police. That's the basic chronology of the night that Ashley Ellerin was murdered. Here's the crime scene. This is Ms. Ellerin's body. She was stabbed 47 times. You can see that there is a lot of blood around her neck. There was blood pooling next to her. It appears that she was rolled over after she had been stabbed, and her left hand and her index finger is on her left thigh, and it is pointed towards her groin. You can see that there's a lot of blood all around the carpet area. There's blood smears inside the bathroom area. A doorknob has been knocked off, and the evidence suggests that there was a very, very violent struggle in this small area. This is a view, again, as I mentioned, the floor plan of the house can be a little bit confusing, so we're trying to give you a visual of the floor plan. This is a view from the front door of the house. This would be if you walked in the front door and you made an immediate left turn and you walked down the wood floor and then up the 3 stairs, actually 4 stairs along the landing, and that's Ashley's body that you can see up there, and then that's her bathroom area right behind her. But this would basically be the view if you stepped in the front door of the house. That's Ashley's body inside the red circle. This is a reverse angle of Ashley's body that shows the angle from her bedroom. You can see her feet are down towards the bathroom door. This is a close-up of Ashley's body. One of the most severe injuries is to the neck area. She was nearly decapitated. The coroner in this case, Dr. Pedro Ortiz, will testify, and he will give you the opinion that this particular incision on her neck is from right to left, which indicates a left-handed attacker would have cut her like this, as I'm indicating now. We believe that's what the doctor's opinion will be. This is a reverse angle that shows from where Ashley's body was, looking toward the door. So her body would be in this area, and then you walk down the wooden floor, and then you go out the door to the right. The placards that you're seeing there, those are either bloody footprints or blood drops. And we're going to have an expert by the name of Steve Schliebe come in from the Sheriff's Department, and he's going to talk more about what those drops mean and what those footprints mean. This is a visual to show you the floor plan of the house and give you the general outline of what we believe the evidence will show is that after Mr. Gargiulo stabbed Ms. Ellerin to death and left her there, this is the path that he took to get out of the house. This is the coroner evidence. Ms. Ellerin was stabbed 47 times. The first stab wounds were to her head. Stab wound number 3 was to the crown of her head. Stab wounds 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 were toward the back of the head and neck area. Stab wounds 9 and 10 were to the right neck area. Stab wound number 11 was to the neck and towards the back of the neck. I believe the coroner will testify that this particular stab wound nearly severed Ms. Ellerin's spine. Stab wound number 12 is adjacent to the main stab wound to the neck. Stab wounds 13 and 14 are to the left clavicle area, subclavian area, the area that was mentioned earlier in the anarchist cookbook passage. Stab wounds 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Were all to Ashley's back and lower back area. Stab wounds 20, 21, and 22 were to the left kidney area. Stab wounds 23, 24, and 25 were down toward the right kidney area, or just below the right kidney. Stab wounds 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30 were to the neck, chest, abdomen, and right abdomen area. One of the wounds was right under the right breast, and that will be discussed in more detail later. Just wanted to point that out to you now. Stab wound 31 and 32 are to the left leg area. Stab wounds 33 and 34 were to the left arm area. Stab wounds 35, 36, 37, and 38 were to the right hand. We believe Dr. Ortiz will give you the opinion that these appear to be defensive wounds. Stab wounds 39 and 40, also to the right hand, appear to be defensive wounds. Stab wounds 41, 42, and 46 To the left hand appear to be defensive wounds. Stab wounds 43, 44, and 45 also appear to be, to the left hand, appear to be defensive wounds. And stab wound number 47 is to the lower left ankle area. Witnesses that you'll hear from in the Ashley Ellerin case, these are Ashley and her friends. There's Ashley. Standing with her are some of her friends. This is Justin Peterson, who was her roommate at some point. And this is Jennifer DeSisto, who was also her roommate at some point. Jennifer DeSisto discovered Ashley's body, and Justin Peterson is a man who came face to face with Mr. Gargiulo and will testify about that. What is noteworthy also in this photograph is in the background. This photograph was taken from a party that occurred a couple of weeks before the murder. And it was during this party when the witnesses will say that Mr. Gargiulo was fixated on Ms. Ellerin. And notably, in the background, there is a figure that you can see in the upper left-hand corner. When that's enhanced and brought forward, that appears to be Mr. Gargiulo. We will have a witness named Monica Grandi come in. This was a birthday party for a person named Monica Grandi. She will testify that this person we're looking at is Mr. Gargiulo, who was in the background in this particular photograph. This is witness Justin Peterson, a friend of Ashley's. He'll testify that Gargiulo would show up uninvited at social gatherings. Gargiulo was watching Ashley's residence at odd hours. Gargiulo flashed a knife, and Mr. Peterson warned Ashley that Gargiulo was watching her. Justin Peterson, as the investigation progressed, and detectives were trying to identify who Michael Gargiulo was, he was referred to as Mike. They knew him as the repairman who was fixing the furnace. They didn't really know his last name. The detectives were trying to figure that out. They eventually figured out that it was Michael Gargiulo. They put his photo in a photographic lineup. That's him up there in the middle on the top row. And below is a comment that was written by Mr. Peterson when he saw that photograph. I know it's hard to see from this position, but basically what it says here is that Mr. Peterson identified Mr. Gargiulo as the man who he saw out in front of Ms. Ellerin's house in his green truck in the middle of the night watching Ms. Ellerin's home. This is Mr. Gargiulo's green truck. Mr. Peterson will talk about this truck and some distinctive features that he saw on this truck that Mr. Gargiulo was hanging out in. I think it was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, sitting in front of Ms. Ellerin's house, sitting in this truck, watching her house. Mr. Peterson is also the witness who will say that when Mr. Gargiulo came to the door and said that the FBI was looking for him for a murder they said he committed in Chicago, Mr. Gargiulo flashed a knife. He had a knife on him. He had a knife in a sheath on his ankle. So the detectives asked Mr. Peterson if he could describe the knife. He said, "I'll do you one better. I'll draw the knife for you." So this is a drawing of the knife that Mr. Peterson did. And Mr. Peterson will testify about that when he comes to court. This is Chris Duran. Chris Duran was a very good friend of Ashley Ellerin's. He will testify that Gargiulo was showing up uninvited at social gatherings. He warned Ashley that Gargiulo was watching her. This is Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin was Ashley's friend and landlord. He had sex with Ashley the night of the stabbing. He left the residence at approximately 8:15 p.m. He had to be home by 8:30 to meet his girlfriend. That's why he knows the times. He called Ashley at 9 p.m. and 9:15 p.m., and she did not answer the phone. And Mr. Durbin, because he had just had sex with Ashley and left the house, he was, you will hear, was an initial focus of the police investigation. This is Mr. Kutcher. He's Ashley's friend. We believe he'll testify that at 10:45 p.m. he arrived at the residence to take Ashley to a Grammy party. Ashley did not come to the door. He looked in the window and saw what appeared to be spilled wine on the floor. He called, but there was no answer, and he left. He believed at that point he had been stood up. Mr. Kutcher is part of the chronology of this case that is offered to show you that there was a narrow, very narrow window of opportunity for somebody to get into the house and murder Ashley. And whoever that person was must have been watching. So the chronology becomes the focus when Mr. Kutcher testifies. This is Jennifer DeSisto. This was Ashley's roommate and friend at the time Mr. Gargiulo killed Ashley. At about 10:15 p.m., she came home. The door was locked, and she didn't have her keys. She left and stayed the night at a friend's house. She came back the next morning and discovered Ashley's body. This is Anthony Castellani. He's a friend of Ashley's. He attended that party at Ashley's residence, the one that we saw the photograph of. And he said Gargiulo showed up uninvited, and he was the last guest to leave. Gargiulo was fixated on Ashley. And Mr. Castellani was so concerned about Mr. Gargiulo and his behavior that Mr. Castellani decided to stay and sleep on the couch due to concerns about Mr. Gargiulo continuing to linger around the house. Monica Grandi was friends with Ashley. She went to the party at Ashley's house that we saw the photograph of. She'll testify that Mr. Gargiulo was fixated on Ashley, and then weeks before Ashley was stabbed to death, Mr. Gargiulo entered the house unexpectedly with a key, surprised Monica and Ashley, and ran away. This is Todd Jackson. He's the man who was walking his dog in the park. He'll testify that he was Ashley's neighbor. And again, this is a witness that is going to be offered to give you a chronology of the events of the night that Ashley was murdered. Todd Jackson was walking his dog in the park. The dog alerted from a scream from Ashley's residence at around 8:15 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Witness Steve Schliebe is a blood spatter expert from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. He's now retired. He'll probably testify the first part of June. And he's going to tell you about these blood drops and bloody footprints that are in the hallway. We believe he'll testify that the blood drops and the bloody shoe prints are oriented toward the door, meaning the blood and the shoe prints are headed out toward that door. The blood drops are oriented generally to the left of the shoe prints. And the point of that, we believe he'll conclude that since the blood drops are to the left of the shoe prints, the killer would have been holding the weapon in the left hand with blood dripping off the weapon. And again, Mr. Gargiulo is left-handed. This is the Maria Bruno murder. Turning now to the Maria Bruno murder. This is Maria. She was 32 years old when Mr. Gargiulo mutilated her to death. This is Ms. Bruno's residence. Again, you'll have the opportunity to actually go out to the residence and you'll see the relationship between Ms. Bruno's apartment and Mr. Gargiulo's apartment. That's her apartment with the red circle around it. Just to the left is the kitchen window, and that's the point of entry. This is an aerial view of Ms. Bruno's residence and Mr. Gargiulo's residence. That's Ms. Bruno's apartment on the lower level across the pool, apartment number 20 in the Arden Way Apartments. And then across the pool, approximately 100 feet away, is Mr. Gargiulo's residence in apartment number 34. We believe you'll have the opportunity to actually go up on that landing and look down across the pool, and you can see that from the angle from Mr. Gargiulo's living room, you can look right down and look into Ms. Bruno's apartment. This is the reverse angle. This is the angle from Maria Bruno's apartment up toward Mr. Gargiulo's apartment. It's a little bit dark in here, but I'm pointing to it now. It's up in this corner pocket up here. There's a tree. His apartment's right up there, and her apartment is right down here on the lower level. So that's the red circle around Mr. Gargiulo's apartment. And then this is actually the view that Mr. Gargiulo had of Ms. Bruno's apartment. So the photographer here would have been standing right in Mr. Gargiulo's living room, taking a photograph right down across the pool and into Ms. Bruno's residence. That's her front door. To the left is the kitchen window, and to the right is her living room window. Here's the chronology of the night of Ms. Bruno's murder. On November 23rd, 2005, Maria Bruno moved into the Arden Way apartments. She was in the process of separating from her husband, Irving, who will testify in this trial. She moved out, and she moved into the Arden Way apartments because she believed it was a very secure apartment building. On November 30th, 2005, at 9 p.m., Irving Bruno left the family home for Maria Bruno for their date. So even though, what you'll hear is that even though Maria and Irving were in the process of breaking up, they were still trying to patch things up, and they were still dating. They were separated at this point. So on November 30th, 2005, they went out. They went out and partied. They went out drinking. On December 1st, 2005, at approximately 2 a.m., Maria and Irving Bruno arrived at Maria's apartment and had sex. So Maria and Irving went out. They had been drinking heavily. They returned to Maria's apartment. They went inside and they had sex. At 2:45 a.m., Irving left Maria's apartment. We believe the evidence will show that as soon as Mr. Irving left, Mr. Gargiulo entered. And murdered Ms. Bruno. At 7:40 a.m., Mr. Bruno returned to Maria's apartment to return her cell phone and to take her to pick up her car to go to work. Since Maria had been drinking, Irving drove her back to her apartment, left her there, went home, and then later that morning drove back to pick her up, give her her phone, and take her back so she could get her car. She had to be to work that morning. Irving knocked on Maria's door, but Maria did not answer. As Irving was leaving, he noticed the window screen on the ground. He climbed into Maria's window to wake her up, and he found Maria dead. Irving called 911, and police officers arrived there minutes later. This is his 911 call.
What's going on? What happened? What happened?
I think somebody broke into my ex-wife's house and they killed her.
Where does she live?
I don't even know the address. Hold on.
Okay, where are you calling me from? Are you there in her house?
Yeah, from a cell phone. I'm calling from a cell phone.
Okay, what's your name?
My name is Bruno.
Irving?
Yes.
And what's your last name, Irving?
Bruno, B-R-U-N-O. Yes.
Okay, just confirm for me that your cell phone number is... Is that right?
No, yeah, that's my ex-wife's number.
Your ex-wife. This is your ex-wife now?
Oh, well, not really. We're just separated.
Okay.
We haven't legally.
Where are you at right now, Irving? Can you give me your address?
Let me ask the neighbor for the address, okay?
Okay.
Is it there? Sir. What's the address there? What's the that? 4626 Arden Way.
4626?
Arden Way.
Okay, that is 4626?
You 4626? Yeah. That's my ex-wife.
Okay, now, Irving?
Yeah?
Tell me what exactly, why would you think that? What did you see?
I was knocking on the door right now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, just knocking on the door.
Okay, why do you think your wife is dead?
I was knocking on the door and then I went into the window because it was unlocked.
Okay.
And when I came inside, there was a pool of blood.
Okay.
There was a pool of blood.
What window did you go to? A living room window or kitchen window?
The kitchen window, and there was a set of knives on the floor.
Uh-huh.
And one of the knives was missing. And I went to go see my ex-wife, and I believe she's dead. They slit her throat.
Did you see her?
Yes, I'm looking at her right now. She's dead.
Okay, don't touch anything, Irving. Who else was with her? Who else was there in the house with her? Do you know?
Nobody. She just said we moved here about less than a week ago.
Okay. Do you have any kids, Irving?
Yes, that's 4 kids.
Where are the kids now?
No, they're at my house.
They're at your house. So your wife was the only one in the house when this happened?
You're the only one here.
Okay. When was the last time you talked to her, Irving?
Last night.
Last night at what time?
Last night I came and dropped her off.
At what time?
It must have been about, let me think.
Yeah, just 6, 7, 8-ish. Later?
No, it was later.
10? Over to midnight?
Hold on. Let me think. Let me think.
Okay. And is your apartment building? What apartment are you in?
Apartment number 20.
Number 20?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm knocking hard on the door and nobody's an answer.
Okay. You haven't touched anything in the house, right?
I did. I came in and
What did you touch?
I touched something that was placed over her mouth.
What was placed over her mouth?
You know that they cut her breast, and one of the nipples was placed over her mouth.
It was placed where?
One of the nipples was placed over her mouth.
Over her mouth?
Yes, they cut her breast.
Okay.
My wife has breast implants.
Okay.
They cut the nipple and it was placed over her mouth.
Okay.
And that was cut.
What was the last time you talked to her?
Last night. I dropped her off here.
What time?
Oh my God. It must have been about, let me think. Maybe about 2 a.m.
What were you guys doing out till 2 a.m.?
Huh?
What were you doing out till 2 a.m., do you know?
Yeah, we had gone to Carmine. It's like a
restaurant?
Bar restaurant, yeah. I dropped her off.
Okay. How long have you been separated?
Very short,
Days, weeks?
Weeks.
About how many?
Maybe like 2-3 weeks.
So you weren't living at the location now?
No, she just looked good. I just hardly.
Do you have clothes and property there?
No, I don't. She still has property at my house. She just moved in here.
Do you know if she was arguing with anybody?
Hello?
Are you inside of apartment 20?
Yes. What happened? No.
Irving, who are you talking to?
I'm trying to talk to the person. No.
Irving,
Yes.
talk to me. Who are you talking to?
I'm talking to people that live here. The thing is that I'm sorry.
Irving?
Oh, I know. You gotta go to the office. I didn't know that. I didn't know that, sir.
Irving?
Yes.
You need to talk to me.
Yes, I'm
Listen to me. The police are on their way. You need to stay on the phone with me. Who is that's with you?
People that work for the upkeeping of
So you're talking to the maintenance
the
guy?
company. Yes.
Okay. Don't worry about that right now. You let me know when you see the officers. Irving?
Yes.
Are you outside of the location or inside?
No, I am outside.
You're outside the apartment, right inside?
Yes.
What are you wearing?
Blue shoes and a brown sweater.
Brown sweater, blue jeans, standing right in front of apartment 20? Okay. Irving?
Yes.
Listen to me, sweetie, okay? I know you're distraught right now, but you need to focus on my voice,
Okay.
okay? They need you to go out to the gate and open the gate. Can you stay on the phone with me while you do that?
Please.
Is he gonna go open it?
Yeah, people. Yes, he is. He's dead.
Okay, Irving. Irving.
Don't tell him I'm talking on the police. You should be focused on
Irving,
worry about it.
listen to me. Don't talk to anybody else. Is somebody going to open the gate? Irving.
Yes.
Okay.
He's already here.
Okay.
He's here.
And talk to them now.
Okay. I'll let you go. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
When police
I think
got
we're
to
gonna
the
take
scene,
our-
this is what they found.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is, we're going to take our break at this point.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You have some other point you want to make? very
No,
quickly?
no, this is Maria's body, and we'll.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind the admonition. We'll resume at 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you.